right. Is that too loud?
Loud enough.
Depends on the age group. All right. Shabbat Shalom. That's a good response. All right. So I'll apologize in advance if I talk too fast. I end up creating a message that I think should take about 30, 40 minutes, and then I deliver it in 12. Not really, but... All right. So, as Rabbi Eric mentioned, just very briefly, so for myself, we live in Texas. We live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We've been there for 4 years. Moved from Tennessee. My wife was actually born in Florida, so it's more of a homecoming for her. I have, most relevant to, I guess, being up here, I have a master's degree in biblical languages from Liberty, and as Rabbi mentioned, I'm doing a PhD in biblical studies currently, God willing, ongoing. But with that, I don't want to take up too much with all the background information. I tend to write everything and it becomes a dissertation of its own, so... This week, the Parsha we've got is Bamidbar, which does not mean numbers, if anybody didn't know that. But even historically, the book was known as a book of numbers just because it immediately opens with a census. So we've, as already been through a little bit, chapter 1 opens with, "In the wilderness of Sinai, on the first day of the second month in the second year from the Exodus from the land of Egypt, Adonai spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting, saying, 'Do a head count of all the community of Bnei Yisrael by their families and their ancestral house, and with a total of every male, one by one. You and Aaron are to muster by their divisions every son from 20 years and upward, available to serve in the army of Israel. One man from each tribe, each head of his father's household, is to assist you.'" So there's some interesting things about the Parsha that aren't immediately available when you first get into it. Numbers contains numerous portions that when you start reading them, you kind of get really sleepy. You start reading a lot of numbers and a lot of names, and so-and-so son of so-and-so, and so-and-so son of so-and-so. A lot of times these ones become the ones that aren't so flashy, right? But I think there's a number of key phrases and words in the Parsha that are worth exploring because of what's not really explicit in most translations. It doesn't necessarily carry through that well into our English Bibles. So separate set of passages, if we skip down just a little bit to verse 17. "Moses and Aaron took these men designated by name. They assembled all the community on the first day of the second month. They declared their lineage according to their families, the households of their forefathers, with the number of the names of those 20 years old and upward being listed individually." A couple key things as we look through these passages and continue through the study today to keep in mind, and we'll kind of circle back on these same things, is where this is happening. Right? This is in the wilderness, and that's what Bamidbar means, right? In the wilderness. And who's doing the counting, right? That's going to be important. And then the fact that we're not just counting people, right? We're not just counting a random crowd here. We will get into the Haftarah a little bit as well, but not the one that was read today. So technically, this Parsha usually coincides with passages from Hosea, but because it's the Shabbat Mevarchim, right, the Sabbath, right, preceding the Rosh Chodesh, it goes to 1 Samuel 20. But normally, Hosea 2 is read here, and that's, I think, an important thematic connection that we'll be making today as well. So, as I mentioned, this portion is one that a lot of times we gloss over because it's a lot of numbers, and if you're not a numbers person, numbers can be difficult, right? So I was at a Bible study one time some years ago and had a brand new family coming in. It was only like their third or fourth week joining us. They had just started learning that the Torah mattered, right? And there's a family of 5 people, and the father decided that he wanted to read within the Bible study for the first time, and it happened to be that what he ended up reading, the poor guy, was all the lists of names from a Messianic Bible translation that is very difficult to pronounce, and it was very slow, and I suffered from secondhand embarrassment. It was painful. But, again, all of that to say, why do we have these? Why do we get so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, and 74,600? We had some of the questions in the foundations class this morning were related to the placement of the tribes. Why this number? Why were they here? Why were they there? But I think there's other deep questions to get into as well. And so just a spoiler, I'm not going to be answering why were they placed here and so on. You can have homework for that one. So one question to start with, why does God need to have them counted at all? He knows everything. Does he not know how many people there are? He could tell Moses how many were there, right? It's not a mystery to him. So that's one of the most key things to understand, I think, from this passage. We oftentimes, if we get counted, right, we feel like just a number, right? And that's a very negative sense. Marketing firms know this. How many commercials do you see where they tell you, you're not just a number? Why do they need to tell me that? Because when I stand in line at the DMV and I'm A64 and they're currently calling A3, I'm just a number. We know this inherently. Feeling like you're just a number is negative. We don't like that. We want to be seen as individuals, not just part of some unnamed group. So again, does God not know how many people there were? Why does he need to know? Well, for one, we know God asks rhetorical questions sometimes, right? And separately, he asks questions that obviously he knows the answer to make a theological point, right? When Adam and Eve are hiding in the garden, he comes and he says, "Where are you?" He didn't lose him. He didn't suddenly disappear, right? Adam didn't apparate out of reality. It's the same thing to Cain. He goes to Cain. He says, "Where's your brother?" I already know where he is, right? So the point is not for God to get the answer to the question because he doesn't know. The point is for their benefit, right? And perhaps even more so, is for our benefit. So again, why counting, right? Why only adult males? Why not count everybody? Right? When they left Egypt, we're told in Exodus how many souls there were, right, that went out. And we extrapolate based on the number of adult men, approximately 50-50 population, this many children, and so on, to arrive at a number. But I think what he starts with is very important here. When he's telling him when Adonai is telling Moses and Aaron to count the people, he says to muster them, right, by their divisions, everyone that's able to serve in the army. So that kind of answers the question of why aren't we counting children, right? Why aren't we counting everyone in the whole population? Now, again, on the surface, it seems pretty simple. It's for a military thing, right? We know that they were going into the land. There was going to be war. There was going to be a military campaign. So it makes sense that you would need to know how big the army is. But in verse 1, he says, when they had come up out of Egypt, right, in the wilderness of Sinai, on the first day of the second month, from the exodus from Egypt. And it's not just count the people. He reiterates again the people who? People that came out of Egypt, because they were slaves. And one very important thing is that slaves don't have a military, right? Slaves don't have an army. They don't have land. And he has freed them from that. They're going to have land. He's going to bring them in and settle them. They're going to have a military because they're going to be an actual nation now. He's going to create that. Another thing with the counting, again, we tend to take this personally and say, I don't like being numbered. I don't like being just a number. The Midrash and some of the rabbinic commentary, Rashi, for example, says that this isn't God counting again because he doesn't know. The purpose is God counting this like you count a treasure. You want to know? You want to keep track of it because it's so precious, as he says. that Israel was a treasured possession. Another thing, as I mentioned, the key words that kind of stand out in this passage, one of them is, in the TLV it says do a head count. That's actually a better translation than most Bibles do. Most of them say take a census. And that's kind of a strange turn of phrase to the ancient world, but what it literally is to raise the head. So he tells Moses and Aaron, he says, raise the head of those in the community, right? Now, lifting the head, why is that important? Well, again, he's talking to a people that were enslaved, people that were not a nation, that he's now formed into a nation, people that didn't have a military, because you don't, now they do. Raising the head is a sign of dignity, right? What do you do when you feel lesser than, when you feel embarrassed, you feel ashamed, you stare at your shoes, right? Lifting the head is an ancient Near Eastern phrase, not just for counting people, but to raise one up. And the counting itself, as we mentioned, isn't just count people. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's by name. So it's not done with some sort of anonymous, estimation of a crowd, right? It's individual. And so much so that they even recorded the names. So again, we come back to what's being done is the lifting of the head, the counting of people by name, right? And then where it's being done is Bamidbar, in the wilderness. We oftentimes, and for various reasons, because of the way we've seen it in movies, because we've seen it in our kids' storybook Bibles, because we remember some painting from way back when, we often think of the wilderness as synonymous with desert. But it's not just simply a desert. It's a little bit more complex than that. The wilderness is the great equalizer, I would call it. In Israel's case, being in the wilderness is a state of limbo, right? They're between Egypt, where they were slaves, and the Promised Land, where they will be a complete and full nation, having their own land, having real status, right? So they're in between there. So spatially, but also at that point in time, the wilderness is kind of like international waters or Antarctica. Nobody really owns it, right? There's no king, there's no prince, there's really no differentiation between commoner and landowner, right, in the wilderness. You're not planting fields in the wilderness. It's a place of humility. It's a place of dependence. The fact that they had to receive the manna shows you they weren't planting fields. They didn't have crops that they were growing. So the wilderness is also the place of announcing and affirming the covenant, right? He calls the people together, Bamidbar, in the wilderness. It's the giving of the Torah to which all people agreed and said, whatever Adonai says, we will do. So he brings them to the wilderness to meet with them. He brings them to the wilderness to give them manna. He brings them to the wilderness as a place of establishing his presence with them. And that's, again, we've just come through you get through Exodus, you get through Leviticus, we come through the construction of the tabernacle. Right? We spend so many chapters in Exodus about the way the tabernacle is built and what goes where and how it's to be utilized and what its purpose is and how it's consecrated. So then the tabernacle is constructed. We know how it's supposed to look. We know what goes into it. We know who's doing what. Then we come to Numbers, and now we get the tribal placement around the tabernacle. Again, I'm not going to answer the burning questions everybody's got is, why is this tribe next to this one, and so on. But the point being, all the tribes are ordered around the tabernacle. It is central within their camp in the wilderness because it is physical but also spiritual proximity to God, right? Being close to the tabernacle was the physical way of being close to his presence. And again, this carries obligations. You have tribal allotment around the tabernacle, and then the Levites further sort of subdivided by household, not just Levite as a tribe, but by clan, also further subdivided around the tabernacle. And there comes with this covenant that they've accepted in the wilderness certain obligations. And again, that's what ties to Hosea. So Hosea 1 and 2, again, on a normal year, Hosea would be the Haftarah that would be read alongside Bamidbar. But Hosea 1, as a summary, I think most people will know it, but as a summary, you have Hosea, the prophet, goes and marries a prostitute and has children, and the naming of these children is itself prophetic of describing the relationship with Israel, right? God's relationship with Israel. So he has a daughter that he's told to name Lo Ruchama, right? No mercy. He has a son that he's told to name Lo Ami, not my people. Why? It's the result of the rebellion of the people, the breach of this relationship, the people that received the covenant, that agreed to do it all that Adonai has said we will do. And then, as we find with the exile, which again is the majority of what the prophets are speaking about and warning of again and again, is a loss of proximity to the presence of God. The exile is pushing you out, away from the tabernacle, or later, temple. And the names that are given, right? The names here are names of judgment, right? Not my people, no mercy. It's what God is pronouncing as judgment. But Hosea isn't entirely depressing as a story. There's also hope, right? There's restoration. And that's what we find so often in the prophets is there is judgment, but, right? There is judgment, but there is hope. There is restoration. Hosea 2, verse 1, he says, yet the number, we have it again, number, of Bnei Yisrael will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted. Instead of, you are not my people, being said to them, they will be called children of the living God. Then the descendants of Judah and descendants of Israel will be gathered together. They will appoint themselves one head, and they will go up from the land, for the day of Jezreel will be great. Say to your brothers, Ami, my people, and to your sisters, Ruchama. So that's the opposite, right? Lo, in Hebrew, of course, is the negative prefix. Lo means no, and bo means go. But lo is not. No mercy becomes mercy. Not my people becomes my people again. Further down in Hosea 2, he says, I will betroth you to me. He explicitly states that he will bring them back again, sow them into the land again. So those that were called not my people will be called my people. Those that did not receive mercy will receive mercy. The curse of the exile, right, the punishment for rebellion is turned to restoration. And this is also featured further in the New Testament in 1 Peter 2. Verse 9 and 10, Peter says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. You were shown no mercy, but now you have been shown mercy. Now, this statement by Peter is not something that he just thought up. These two verses actually contain a multitude of alliterations, quotes, references to the prophets and to the Torah. A royal priesthood, chosen people, holy nation, God's own possession, right? There's echoes of this from Deuteronomy 7, from Isaiah 43. This is the covenant people of God. He also cites Exodus 19. Again, that royal priesthood, holy nation language. And what he's getting at, what he's driving at, is that this is the fulfillment. Again, he's talking about living a holy calling now that Messiah has come, which Peter says earlier. But living out that calling as a holy people, right? That's being brought in restoration, restored back, not just because, but restored back to that nation of God. that had previously been exiled. So again, he's quoting Hosea because Hosea already anticipated this being fulfilled. The exile was happening, but he already anticipated that you will receive mercy. You will be called my people. So again, with the Parsha in Numbers, all of this taking place in the wilderness. And again, we can view so many times the narratives and the stories in the Torah as that, right? As a story, as something that happened. It was a really long time ago. But what does that mean to me? What do I do with being in the wilderness? I've never lived in the desert. I've never counted thousands of people. But everyone has had a wilderness experience, I'm willing to bet, if you're in here, right? You've had a time where you've felt lost. You felt without direction. You felt like you've wandered, not really getting anywhere. I think Rebbitzin made the comment actually this morning about the children of Israel wandering for 40 years for a journey that should have taken 11 days. Have you ever wandered for a long time over what should have been a really short journey, right? Now, once you get there, it's pretty easy to think back and go, man, I should have just taken a left. That would have been so much faster, right? Without direction. Don't know where you're going. Oftentimes, we feel like that spiritually when we have seasons of, well, I prayed for this. Maybe he's not going to give me all the answers, but I just want the next one, just the next answer. And we don't feel like we get it. What do we do then? Right? Again, I'll give you the short answer, still covenant faithfulness. And sometimes that non-answer, not getting the next answer, becomes an answer itself. We're not sure of the plan. By trade, I'm a engineer, and I like the next thing. I like to know what the steps are. Lego sets are great because every single thing is planned out. I know what step 1 is, I know what step 42 is, and I know what the final picture will look like as long as I follow the steps. But unfortunately, life doesn't give us those sort of steps and instructions. Wandering in the wilderness is a time where we don't have the inheritance yet, but we're still dependent for everything. And I think that's a large part of why they're called the children of Israel in the wilderness, because they're still living in dad's house. Dad's still paying the rent. Dad's still buying the food, right? Delivering the manna. Dependent for everything and still constantly complaining, right? I've got 5 kids. There's hardly a meal that gets set out at my house where someone's not going, does it have to be this? I don't like mac and cheese. Since when? You know? That's that whole part of Israel in the wilderness, Bamidbar, makes a lot more sense to me now as a parent than it did a long time ago reading it. I'm like, I don't get it. They're complaining. What is it? Like, why is he so mad? Oh, yeah. Me too. So one other thing, and I mentioned it a little bit ago, not just being counted in the wilderness, but being named in the wilderness. And when you have a very big crowd, if you ever have worked for a very large company, if the CEO comes in, unless you work really close to the top, you don't even expect him to know your name. You don't even expect him to know who you are. But here you've got hundreds of thousands of people being not only numbered, here's your employee ID, but also being named. Intentionally, God wants them to know that he knows their name. And I think the same applies for us. So when we have these wilderness experiences, we can call them, when we have the times that we are without direction, we haven't gotten to the final destination yet, we haven't received the inheritance yet, we're still entirely dependent on what Abba's going to give us. This is also a time that we're very vulnerable to the enemy, right? When you don't have direction, when you don't know what's next, it's a very easy time to see yourself as a failure, as broken, unwanted, unimportant, right? But Adonai calls us my people, not a people, not some people, his people. He calls us chosen and treasured. That's a pretty high compliment. And it says a lot about, especially dealing with feelings of inadequacy or problems with self-worth, being, the one who's the primary breadwinner in your household, not knowing about, that promotion or that new job that you've tried to get, or losing a job. It's very difficult to be humble when you enter a wilderness experience, because we want to be so individualistic, as we in the West love to do, is to say, well, I have to figure it out, I'm going to have to do it, and it's about me and what I can accomplish. But again, we are part of God's people, and He says we are chosen. He says that we are His treasured possession. And if you haven't had a major time in the wilderness, which again, I would assume most people have, but if you haven't, you should. Everybody needs one. We have to remember even Yeshua had a time in the wilderness, being completely dependent on the Father. And his time in the wilderness was also the time that the enemy came to him to test him and to try him. But, as I said, we all, even in the wilderness, we all have a tribe, we all have a clan, we all have a place to connect with others in the body. In a situation like this, where everybody's physically able to gather together, that's the easiest to see. For some people, whether those are watching online or what have you, that don't have a local body to congregate with, it can be more of a challenge. I usually tell people, often you'll see folks like to treat congregations like a buffet. Like, I don't really like this one, I'll go try that one. Somebody said something I didn't like, so I'm going to go somewhere else. And that's all great and all, but Torah, if we are serious about it, as we claim to be, Torah is meant to be kept in community. You have commandments issued in Leviticus and commandments issued in Deuteronomy. Some are individual, which again in the language, we don't see it so much in English, because if I say you don't know if I'm talking to a single person or a group of people, right? Except in the South, we say y'all. But in the Torah, there are commandments to individuals, and there are commandments to the community. And you need to be living in community to be able to truly walk out what the Torah is intended to serve. So for people that feel disconnected, that feel like just a number, to the individual, you shouldn't. But I'm not going to tell you not to feel a certain way. More so an encouragement for the community as a whole to make sure that we don't give people that feeling, that we don't become off-putting, that we don't make people feel like they are just a number because they're not really connected. We haven't welcomed them. I've been in congregations before that are not very hospitable. You go in, you're a guest, no one there knows you, and you sit down and you listen and nobody talks to you. You have oneg afterwards and nothing gets said. One of the first things when my family visited Britam here last year that was immediately standing out was how hospitable everybody said hi. Everybody introduced themselves. Everybody said Shabbat Shalom. Everybody was very welcoming. Hopefully there's not a test on remembering people's names. But that's important, right? Because again, the body's supposed to be like that. So for the people that aren't connected yet, get connected. And sometimes we don't notice. We have introduced ourselves to that person. They're a little standoffish. We don't want to make them too uncomfortable, so we just kind of let them be a little standoffish. But we have an obligation to the community as a whole. We have an obligation to plug in, to serve, right? Even Yeshua said that he didn't come to be served, but to serve. And our master's example is for us. The other thing is when Adonai lifted their heads, he assigned them tasks. He counted, right? The people counted the people. But Adonai said to lift their head, and he assigned them a task. They knew if they were being counted and their name was being written down, they were officially part of the military now, right? They were going to be in the army of Israel. They knew that they had a new vocation. In 1 Peter 2:9, the word that Peter uses, hopos, it means so that, right? So that, for a purpose, right? You're chosen, you are his people for a purpose, not for our own sake, just to be his people, right? We're not his people to be his people for his people's sake, Right? We are chosen for a purpose to proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Right? This is a statement of calling and a statement of purpose. So I would add the final sort of homework, sort of introspection here at the end. Ask yourself, ask your spouse, take it home, sit with it for a while, about how do you proclaim the praises of God as you are called to do this week? How do I do it at home? How do I do it at school, at work, at the airport when your flight's delayed heading back to Dallas? Sitting in traffic, especially Dallas traffic. And again, remember that God knows your name, not just your number, that he has called you for specific purpose, that you are part of his people, right? And that a large part of that purpose is to proclaim the praises of the one who called us. Amen? Thank you.